My name is Natalie. I'm 27 years old. For the past 3 years, I've been working double shifts as a nurse just to keep my family afloat. I gave up weekends. I missed birthdays. I turned down vacations with my friends. I stayed late at work more times than I can count. I told myself it was worth it, that family comes first, no matter how hard it gets. But last week, everything changed. I had just sent my parents $9,200. Rent money they said they desperately needed to keep the house. I was exhausted but relieved, thinking I had saved them from disaster again. Then, a friend sent me a screenshot. There they were, my parents, smiling on Instagram in front of a 5-star Hawaiian resort. Drinks in their hands. Matching lies around their necks. Living their best life while I was sitting on the floor of my tiny apartment, eating ramen noodles for the 3rd night in a row. I wasn't even unblocked long enough to see it myself. They had blocked me, posted about the trip, and thought I'd never find out. The heartbreak hit me first. Then came the anger. Then the questions. How could they do this to me? After everything I've done? After every shift I pulled? Every sacrifice I made? I thought I was helping my family survive. Instead, I was funding their vacation. But trust me, I didn't let them get away with it. What would you have done if you saw your parents doing this? Comment below before I tell you what I did next because it shocked everyone. That night, as I sat there shaking, my phone buzzed. It was my mom. She was asking for even more money. And that's where this story really begins. I was sitting on the floor of my apartment when it happened. My apartment was nearly empty. The walls were bare. There was no couch, no dining table, just a mattress on the floor and a small lamp next to it. I had just sent my parents $9,200 earlier that day. It was all my savings, everything I had managed to hold on to after months of working double shifts at the hospital. I grabbed my phone to distract myself. I scrolled through my feed absent-mindedly, not expecting anything out of the ordinary. Then I froze. Right there on my screen was a picture of my parents. They were standing on a beach in Hawaii. The sky was golden behind them, the waves crashing softly in the background. My mom had a bright flower lying around her neck. My dad was holding a drink with a tiny umbrella in it, smiling like he didn't have a single worry in the world. For a moment, I just stared at the screen. My heart started to pound so hard I could feel it in my throat. I had been skipping meals to save money. I had been saying no to every invitation, every plan, every little thing that might cost me a few extra dollars. And they were out there living in luxury, on a vacation I had unknowingly paid for. I felt my stomach twist. The betrayal hit me like a punch to the chest. I could feel my hands shaking as I scrolled through more pictures. There were photos of them eating expensive meals, lounging by the pool, and dancing under tiki lights. How could they do this to me? How could the same people who raised me, who taught me to always put family first, turn around and use me like this? I thought about the night before, when my mom had called me crying, saying they might lose the house if I didn't send the rent right away. I had worked extra hours for weeks just to make that payment happen. Now I was sitting alone, in the dark, with nothing left in my bank account while they were sipping cocktails by the ocean. The anger started to boil inside me. My chest felt tight, my face hot. I wanted to scream, cry, throw my phone across the room. I didn't just feel hurt. I felt humiliated. My phone buzzed. I looked down and saw a new text message. It was my mom. She was asking if I could send a little extra this month. I just sat there staring at the screen, my heart pounding in my ears. That was the moment something inside me snapped. I still remember the day I moved back home after college. I had just graduated with my nursing degree. My friends were talking about moving to new cities, traveling abroad, and chasing big dreams. I packed my car with everything I owned and drove back to my parents' house. At the time, it felt like the responsible choice. My parents had been struggling financially for a while, and I told myself I would stay just long enough to save some money and help them get back on their feet. When I pulled into the driveway, my mom hugged me so tight she started crying. My dad patted me on the back and said he was proud of me for coming home. My younger brother, Ryan, looked relieved. He had been living there alone with them and told me things had been tense for months. I thought I could be the one to bring some stability back into the house. The first few weeks were good. We had family dinners, movie nights, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like we were close again. But after the first month, my dad called me into the kitchen late one evening. He sat at the table with a stack of bills in front of him and a look of exhaustion on his face. He told me that things were bad, really bad. The mortgage was overdue, utilities were behind, and if something didn't change, they could lose the house. My mom sat beside him, nodding with tears in her eyes. That night, they asked me if I could start paying them rent. They said it would only be temporary, just until they got back on their feet. I agreed without even thinking twice. I loved them. They were my parents. If paying a little rent could keep the house running, I would do it. At first, the rent was reasonable. It was just a small portion of my paycheck, enough to help with groceries and bills. But as the months went by, things started to shift. I noticed my brother, Ryan, becoming more withdrawn. He would sit quietly at the table during dinner, barely touching his food. One night, after our parents went to bed, he came to my room and apologized. "I feel bad you have to pay so much," he whispered. "They never asked me for anything." I told him it was fine, that I didn't mind helping. But deep down, I started to feel the weight of it. Every time I got paid, I barely had enough left for myself. I was working long shifts, sometimes 12 hours straight, and still felt like I was barely keeping my head above water. Then one night, everything changed. I came home late from work, my scrub still smelling like antiseptic, and found my parents waiting for me in the living room. The TV was off, and the atmosphere felt heavy. My dad stood up and cleared his throat before he spoke. He told me he had lost his job. He didn't give many details, just said the company was downsizing and he was let go. My mom jumped in quickly, saying they were going to need a lot more help from me. Then they told me the rent was doubling. If I couldn't pay it, they said, I might have to move out. I stood there frozen, my bag still on my shoulder, my mind spinning. Move out? I had just moved home to help them. I had just started building some stability of my own. And now they were telling me I had to either come up with double the money or find somewhere else to live. My chest tightened as I nodded silently, not even sure how I was going to make it work. That night, as I lay awake in bed staring at the ceiling, I felt something I hadn't felt before. Fear. And I knew that this was only the beginning. I still remember how quickly my life started to revolve around work. After my dad told me he lost his job and that my rent had doubled, I didn't have time to think about whether it was fair or not. I just knew I had to find a way to pay for it. I started volunteering for every extra hospital shift I could get. I picked up the weekends. I stayed overnight when someone called out. I even gave up some of my vacation days so I could cash them in for extra money. Soon, my whole life became a cycle of working, sleeping, and paying bills. My friends started noticing that I was never around anymore. They would text me asking if I wanted to meet up for dinner or go see a movie, and I always had to say no. I would stare at my phone for a while before replying, embarrassed that I couldn't even afford a night out without worrying how I would make rent. One day, a close friend invited me to join a group trip to Miami. It was supposed to be a celebration for all of us finally having steady jobs after college. I stared at the message for what felt like forever. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to be carefree and fun again. But when I checked my bank account, the answer was clear. I sent back a polite message. I can't afford it this time. Maybe next year. When I put my phone down, I sat on the edge of my bed and cried quietly. It wasn't just about missing the trip. It was about realizing how much of my own life I had put on hold for my parents. Ryan noticed how much I was struggling. One night, I came home after a 14-hour shift to find him sitting in the kitchen with his head in his hands. He looked up when I walked in and I could see his eyes were red. "I'm sorry, Nat," he said, his voice breaking. "I hate that you're going through all this. I should be helping too, but they don't ask me for anything." I sat down beside him and put my arm around his shoulder. "It's not your fault," I told him. "I can handle it. I just want to make sure you finish school without worrying about money." He nodded, but I could tell it didn't make him feel better. It didn't make me feel better either. Weeks went by like this. Wake up. Work. Pay rent. Sleep. Repeat. I was running myself into the ground just to keep my parents comfortable. Then one night, I came home late and dropped my bag by the door. I noticed something different immediately. The living room looked brighter somehow. When I turned on the light, my heart sank. There was a brand new sectional couch where the old worn-out one used to be. A shiny new coffee table. And right there on the wall was a 75-inch flat-screen TV that definitely hadn't been there that morning. I stood in the doorway staring at it, my chest tightening. I had been eating cereal for dinner 3 nights in a row just to save a few dollars, and here they were buying luxury furniture. My first thought was that maybe I was wrong, maybe they had gotten a great deal somewhere or bought it secondhand. But deep down, I knew they had used the money I was killing myself to earn to buy all of this. And that was the night something inside me started to crack. The next morning, I woke up still thinking about the new furniture. It didn't make sense. The numbers just weren't adding up. I had been working myself to exhaustion, barely keeping up with their rent demands, and now there was evidence that they were somehow living comfortably enough to buy a luxury setup for the living room. I found my parents in the kitchen sipping coffee like nothing had happened. "Hey," I said slowly, trying to keep my voice calm. "Where did the new furniture come from?" My mom glanced at my dad before answering, too quickly. "It was on credit," she said. "Don't worry about it. We'll pay it off eventually." I didn't believe her. Not completely. "On credit?" I repeated, raising an eyebrow. "But we're still behind on bills, right? That's what you said last week." My dad gave me a look that made it clear the conversation was over. "We've got it under control, Natalie. Just keep doing what you're doing and everything will work out." I nodded, but inside, I felt something shift. For the first time since I had moved back home, I wasn't sure I believed them. That night, I sat in my room staring at my laptop, running numbers again and again. I realized I couldn't keep living like this. I couldn't keep working until my body gave out just to cover rent for a house that wasn't even mine, for parents who seemed to be living better than I was. So I made a decision. I opened a new savings account that my parents didn't know about. Every time I got paid, I would put aside a little money for myself, just a small emergency fund at first, but it felt like taking back a tiny piece of my freedom. As the weeks went by, I got better at hiding how I felt. I smiled when they showed off the new furniture to visitors. I laughed when my dad bragged about how hardworking his daughter was. But every time I put money into that secret account, it was a reminder that I was planning my escape. One evening after a long shift, I came home to find them sitting in the living room talking in low voices. I froze in the hallway, not wanting them to know I was there. "Do you think we'll have enough by then?" my mom whispered. "Yeah," my dad said, sounding confident. "If Natalie sends the next payment on time, we'll be fine. We just have to book the flights soon." I felt my stomach twist. Book the flights? I stayed completely still, listening as my mom giggled softly. "This trip is going to be amazing," she said. "I've always wanted to go somewhere tropical." My heart started pounding. A trip? With what money? I backed away from the doorway before they could see me, my mind racing. I went to my room, closed the door quietly, and sat on my bed staring at the wall. I had just worked a 14-hour shift and skipped lunch to make sure I could send them the rent money on time, and now they were talking about vacations. My chest felt tight. That was the night the doubt stopped being a whisper and became a shout. Something was very, very wrong. I lay awake for hours, thinking about what I had just heard, until finally, I made a decision that would change everything. But before I could put any plan into action, things escalated faster than I ever expected. Because the very next day, I overheard my parents whispering about something much bigger. A big trip. And not just any trip, one that would take every penny I had worked for. For a brief moment, I thought things might finally get better. After months of working double shifts, covering holidays, and saying yes to every extra hour the hospital could throw at me, I got called into my supervisor's office. She smiled as she handed me the paperwork. "Congratulations, Natalie," she said. "You're getting a raise." It wasn't life-changing money, but to me it felt like a step toward freedom. On the drive home, I rolled the windows down and let the cold Colorado air hit my face. I actually caught myself smiling, imagining what it would be like to put a little more into my secret savings account. Maybe even take a short weekend trip with my friends. Just something to remind myself that my life wasn't only about work and paying other people's bills. When I walked through the front door that evening, my parents were sitting in the living room. I felt light enough to share the good news. "Hey," I said, smiling. "I got a raise at work today." My mom's face lit up for a second, but then I saw my dad glance at her, and just like that, her smile faded into something calculating. "That's great, honey," my dad said slowly. "You know, with prices going up, maybe you could help us out a little more this month." My stomach sank. "You mean, raise the rent?" I asked carefully. "Well, just a little," my mom said in her sweetest voice. "We've been really struggling, Natalie. And you know how much we appreciate what you're doing for the family." I bit my lip, the happiness from earlier slipping away like water down a drain. "I was actually hoping I could keep some of the raise for myself," I said gently. "Just to save for emergencies." The look my parents gave me made me feel like I had just slapped them across the face. "Emergencies," my dad repeated, his tone sharp. "Your mother and I are in an emergency. We're drowning here, Natalie, and you're worried about taking a trip or buying yourself new clothes." I swallowed hard. I didn't say anything about the trip. I've been working so much, and I thought maybe I could save a little. My mom let out a sigh that felt heavy with disappointment. "You know, when we raised you, we never asked for anything in return. And now, when we finally need you, you want to hold back? That's not like you, Natalie." I felt the guilt creep in, cold and sharp. I hated this part, the way they made me feel like a bad daughter for even thinking about myself. "Fine," I said quietly. "I'll send more." They smiled then, both of them, and thanked me, but the happiness felt forced, empty. I went upstairs to my room, shut the door, and sat on my bed with my head in my hands. I had never felt so trapped. The next day at work, I felt the pressure building in my chest all morning. It was like my body had finally decided it couldn't keep going like this. I made it through one patient chart, then another, but when a doctor asked me a simple question, I froze, my mind completely blank. I tried to answer, but my breathing started coming faster, too fast, until I felt dizzy. "Natalie," one of the other nurses said, her voice sounding far away. I backed into the staff room, clutching the counter as my heart pounded so hard it felt like it would burst. I couldn't catch my breath, couldn't think straight. My hands were shaking uncontrollably. Someone called for my supervisor, and she came rushing in. She helped me sit down, put a glass of water in my hands, and waited until my breathing slowed. "Nat, are you okay?" she asked softly. Tears stung my eyes as I shook my head. "I think I just had a panic attack," I whispered. She nodded, looking worried. "I think you need to take the rest of the day off. And maybe talk to someone about what's going on. You've been running yourself ragged." The shame was unbearable. I had worked so hard to prove I could handle it all, and now here I was, barely holding myself together. On the way home, I gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles hurt. I couldn't keep living like this. I couldn't keep sacrificing everything, my health, my happiness, just to keep them comfortable. But the moment I stepped through the door, I knew nothing had changed. My parents were already waiting for me at the kitchen table, bills spread out in front of them. "We need to talk about next month's payment," my dad said. I stared at them, my heart still racing from what had happened at work. For the first time, I didn't answer right away. For the first time, I felt something new stirring inside me, anger. And this time, I wasn't sure I could push it down. I was sitting in my room late one night, trying to force myself to go through another online budget calculator, when there was a soft knock on my door. I looked up to see my younger brother standing there, looking hesitant, almost nervous. He had his phone in his hand, gripping it so tightly his knuckles were white. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" he asked quietly. I nodded and motioned for him to come in. He shut the door behind him and sat down on the edge of my bed, his face serious. "I wasn't sure if I should tell you this," he said slowly, "but I can't keep watching what they are doing to you." My heart started beating faster. "What do you mean?" I asked. He unlocked his phone and scrolled for a few seconds before turning the screen toward me. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at from a series of Instagram posts and Facebook screenshots. But then I saw it clearly, a picture of my parents smiling ear to ear, standing in front of a travel agency sign. The caption read, "Finally booked our dream vacation. Hawaii, here we come." I felt my stomach drop. "They posted this last week," my brother said softly. I think they blocked you from seeing it, but I saw it on Dad's public profile before he switched it to friends only. They've been talking about it non-stop when you're not around. My hands trembled as I took his phone and scrolled through the posts. There were comments from their friends congratulating them, people saying how jealous they were, asking how long they'd be gone. My parents had replied to some of them, joking about finally rewarding themselves after a hard few years. Rewarding themselves. I had worked myself to exhaustion, had skipped vacations, skipped birthdays, missed out on my entire social life, and they were using my rent money to take a luxury vacation. I handed my brother's phone back, my chest tight, my throat burning. "Thank you for telling me," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He nodded, looking guilty. "I just thought you should know. I hate what they are doing to you." After he left, I sat in the dark staring at the floor. I felt like my entire world had tilted sideways. Every late shift, every tearful night wondering if I'd ever get ahead, every moment of guilt they had used to make me send them money, it all came rushing back like a tidal wave. But instead of storming into the living room and demanding answers, I stayed quiet. I kept paying the rent because the thought of confronting them made me feel like a little girl again, afraid of disappointing them. I told myself I could handle it for just a little longer, that maybe after the trip they would finally stop asking for money. The days leading up to their trip felt like torture. I watched them pack suitcases, talk excitedly on the phone to friends, even buy new swimsuits and luggage tags. Every time I heard them laugh together, it felt like another knife twisting in my chest. And then, the night before they were supposed to leave, my mom knocked on my door with a smile. "Sweetheart," she said gently, "we just need one last payment before we go. About $3,000 should cover everything." I stared at her, my heart pounding in my ears. Everything? The trip was already booked. The bags were already packed. What exactly was I paying for now? I didn't answer right away, and for a moment, I think she saw the look in my eyes. But then she smiled again, as if nothing had changed. "Just send it tonight, okay?" she said softly before walking away. I sat there frozen, my phone in my lap, my mind spinning. $3,000. After everything they had already taken. And that was the moment something inside me finally broke. I stared at my phone for what felt like hours after my mom asked for the final payment. My chest felt tight, my stomach was in knots, and a part of me wanted to scream, to finally tell them no. But I couldn't bring myself to do it. I had been trained for so long to put their needs above my own that saying no felt impossible. So, with trembling hands, I opened my bank app and looked at my savings account, the one I had been slowly building in secret for months. It wasn't much, but it was supposed to be my safety net, my escape plan. Seeing the balance drop to nearly zero when I transferred the $3,000 made me feel like the air had been sucked out of the room. When the confirmation notification popped up, I stared at it until tears blurred my vision. I had just given away the last bit of financial security I had, and I didn't even know why anymore. My parents didn't say thank you. They didn't check on me. They just sent a short text that read, "Got it. Thanks." That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. Something inside me was shifting, hardening. For the first time in my life, I felt anger burn hotter than guilt. The next morning, I made a decision. I opened Instagram, searched for my parents' accounts, and blocked them both. Then I blocked them on Facebook. And on WhatsApp. If they wanted my money so badly, they could have it, but they wouldn't have access to me anymore. Not to my thoughts, my feelings, or my life. For a few days, I actually felt lighter. I went to work, kept my head down, and tried to focus on rebuilding what little savings I could. But then, 3 days later, I got a message from my best friend with the words, "You need to see this." She sent me a screenshot. It was a picture of my parents on Instagram. Standing on a beach, the ocean behind them glowing golden in the setting sun. They were both smiling, drinks in hand, wearing matching leis. The caption read, "Finally living the life we deserve. Aloha from Hawaii." I stared at the picture until my chest physically hurt. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped my phone. I swiped to the next screenshot she sent, then the next. There they were, laughing at a luau, posing with tourists, eating expensive meals, lounging in poolside cabanas. Picture after picture showed them living their best lives while I was still scraping together gas money and skipping meals to keep the lights on. My vision blurred with tears. I felt like I couldn't breathe. I had emptied my savings account for this. I had sacrificed my health, my time, my freedom, and this was how they repaid me. I sat down on the edge of my bed, clutching my phone, feeling the weight of every sacrifice I had made pressing down on me. The exhaustion, the double shifts, the panic attack at work, the birthdays and vacations I had missed, all of it hit me at once, and it felt unbearable. And then, slowly, something inside me snapped. No more. No more begging for scraps of gratitude. No more letting them drain me dry while they celebrated without a care in the world. I wiped my face, stood up, and looked at myself in the mirror. My cheeks were still wet with tears, but my jaw was set, my eyes sharper than they had been in months. This time, I wasn't going to just take it. This time, I was going to make them regret it. And I didn't just mean with words. The night I made the decision to fight back, I barely slept. I tossed and turned, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing through every possibility. For years I had been playing by their rules, bending over backward to make sure they were comfortable, and all it had done was leave me broken. This time, I was going to play smart. The next day, instead of scrolling aimlessly on my lunch break, I pulled out my phone and started researching. I read everything I could find about tenant rights, rent agreements, and financial laws in Colorado. I learned what counted as legal rent versus exploitation, what landlords were allowed to charge, and even what rights I had if they tried to force me out. The more I read, the angrier I got and the more empowered I felt. For the first time, I realized I wasn't as powerless as they had made me feel. Every night after work, I sat at my laptop with a cup of coffee, bookmarking articles, taking notes, and putting together a plan. I started keeping careful records of every payment I had ever made, combing through my bank statements and printing receipts. I organized everything into folders so neatly that it looked like I was preparing for a court case. Maybe, in a way, I was. One night, after hours of research, I called my brother into my room and shut the door behind him. He sat down on the edge of my bed, looking worried. "I can't keep doing this," I said quietly, sliding the folder of documents across the bed toward him. "I've been paying more than fair rent for years. And look at this, I've sent them over $25,000 since I moved back home. That's enough for a down payment on my own place." He looked through the papers, his brow furrowing. "I knew you were helping them, but I didn't realize it was this much." "I'm done being their personal bank account," I said, my voice firmer now. "I'm getting out of this house, and I'm going to make sure they never take advantage of me again." He was quiet for a long time, then finally nodded. "I hate what they've done to you," he admitted. "And if you're serious about leaving, I'll help you." Hearing those words made something inside me loosen, like a knot finally coming undone. For the first time, I didn't feel completely alone. Over the next few days, I started gathering every piece of information I could about my parents' finances. Quietly, carefully, I watched how they handled money, listened when they talked on the phone, and noted every suspicious expense. I was determined to figure out where my hard-earned money had gone and just how much they were hiding from me. One Friday evening, I sat at the kitchen table when my parents weren't home, flipping through a stack of mail they had left out. Most of it was junk, but one envelope caught my eye. It was addressed to them from Airbnb. My heart started pounding as I opened my laptop and typed their address into the Airbnb search bar. And there it was. A listing for my childhood bedroom. The photos made my stomach twist. The bed I had grown up sleeping in was neatly made with decorative pillows, the dresser cleared of my things, the caption boasting about a cozy private room in a family home. The reviews were glowing, praising my parents as kind hosts who made guests feel welcome. I scrolled through the calendar and saw that the room had been booked almost every weekend for months. All that time I had been working myself to death to pay them rent. They had been making extra income behind my back, using the very room that was supposed to be mine. I felt my pulse pounding in my ears as I stared at the screen. This wasn't just taking advantage of me. This was betrayal on a whole new level. And suddenly, my plan for revenge became crystal clear. The day I found out about the Airbnb listing, something inside me shifted. I wasn't just angry anymore, I was focused. I knew I needed proof, something undeniable that would show everyone exactly what had been happening to me. So I began documenting everything. Each morning before work, I went through my banking app and screenshot every transfer I had made to my parents since I moved back home. I organized them by month, labeled them carefully, and saved them both on my laptop and a hidden cloud folder. In the evenings, I scrolled through my messages and emails, capturing every text my parents had ever sent asking for money. Their words now felt like evidence in a case I was slowly building. I even went back to old group chats with my brother, where we had talked about how stressful things were, just so I had a full record of what I had endured. It was exhausting, reliving every request, every payment, every guilt trip. Sometimes I had to stop and take a deep breath because the anger bubbled so hot I could barely think straight. But the more I collected, the more empowered I felt. With every screenshot, I was taking back a piece of control that I had lost. One night after work, my brother knocked softly on my bedroom door. I motioned for him to come in and showed him the growing folder on my computer. "Look at this," I whispered, clicking through the evidence I had gathered. His eyes widened. "This is a lot," he said quietly. "If people saw this, they'd finally know what's really been going on." "That's the point," I replied. "I'm not just going to walk away. I'm going to make sure they can't twist this around and make me look like the bad one. I want the truth out there." Would you expose them publicly or handle it quietly? Tell me below. I'm so curious how you'd handle something like this. Over the next week, I kept adding to my folder. Then one night, I got something that made my stomach turn. I had come home late from a double shift, and my parents didn't know I was there. As I climbed the stairs, I heard their voices coming from the living room. Curiosity got the better of me, and I stopped just outside the doorway, pulling out my phone and quietly hitting record. My father was laughing, his voice loud and careless. "Can you believe she actually sent the last 3,000? I thought for sure she'd say no this time." My mother chuckled too. "I told you she would. All I had to do was tell her we were behind on bills. It's so easy, she just sends it without question." I stood there frozen, my hand shaking as I held the phone. Hearing them. When my parents finally returned from their Hawaiian vacation, I was waiting. I had rehearsed this moment in my head for days, running through every possible response they could give me and every word I needed to say. My heart pounded as I heard their car pull into the driveway. The sound of their laughter drifted through the open window as they carried in their bags, still tanned and glowing from their time in paradise. I sat at the kitchen table with my folder of evidence in front of me, hands clenched so tightly that my knuckles ached. My mother was the first to spot me. She froze in the doorway, clearly surprised to see me sitting there. "Oh, honey," she said cautiously, as though testing the waters. "We were going to call you later." My father followed behind her, looking tired but content, as if he had just returned from the most stress-free week of his life. I felt my anger flare as I looked at them. These were the people I had been working myself to the bone for, the ones I had nearly gone into debt to support. "I know where you've been," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. I pushed the folder toward them, letting the papers fan out on the table. Bank statements, screenshots of their Instagram posts, the Airbnb listing, even a USB drive with the recording of them laughing about me. It was all there. "I know about the trip. I know about Airbnb. I know about everything." For a moment, they just stared at me, their expressions blank. Then my mother let out a sharp laugh, as though this was some kind of joke. "Natalie, you're overreacting," she said, waving a hand dismissively. "You know we needed a break. You wouldn't understand the stress we've been under." My father stepped forward, his tone hardening. "You've been living under our roof for years. Do you think you didn't owe us something for all that time we took care of you?" His words hit me like a slap. All the late nights, the double shifts, the vacations I had missed, they were brushing it all aside as if it had meant nothing. "I don't owe you for existing," I snapped, my voice rising for the first time. "You asked me to help you because you said you were struggling. I trusted you. I believed you. And while I was working myself to death, you were taking vacations and renting out my room to strangers." My hands shook as I pointed to the evidence on the table. "You lied to me. Over and over again. And I'm done letting you get away with it." My mother's face tightened, her tone turning sharp. "You wouldn't have had a place to live if it weren't for us. You should be grateful. Grateful. I felt a bitter laugh escape my lips. I have been nothing but grateful. I gave you everything I had, and you still wanted more. I skipped dinners, I skipped sleep, I skipped living my own life to make sure you were okay. And you took advantage of me anyway. The argument spiraled from there, years of resentment pouring out of me like floodwater. Every slight, every moment I had swallowed my pride and said yes when I wanted to say no, came crashing to the surface. My father raised his voice, my mother tried to guilt me, but I didn't back down this time. The anger that had been simmering in me for years had finally boiled over, and there was no putting it back. When the shouting finally stopped, the house was silent. My parents stared at me, looking stunned that I had stood up to them at all. I took a deep breath, steadying myself, then said the words I had been holding onto for weeks. I'm done. I'm not giving you another penny. Tomorrow, I'm moving out. I stood up from the table, grabbed my folder, and walked out of the kitchen before they could say another word. That night, as I packed my things into boxes, my heart pounded with a strange mix of fear and relief. I didn't know what was going to happen next, but one thing was certain, I was done being their victim. The morning after I moved out, the silence felt deafening. I woke up in my new apartment surrounded by half-unpacked boxes, the faint smell of fresh paint still in the air. It should have felt like freedom, but instead I felt the weight of everything that had just happened pressing down on my chest. I knew I had done the right thing, but I also knew my parents would not take it quietly. Sure enough, by the afternoon, the first posts appeared. My mother posted a long, emotional message on Facebook about children who abandon their parents when they need them most. She didn't mention my name, but everyone knew who she was talking about. The comments poured in, people expressing sympathy for her, friends telling her how heartless her daughter must be. I scrolled through them with a mix of anger and disbelief. It was one thing for them to lie to me in private, but to try to paint me as the villain in public was too much. Within a day, my father joined in, posting a picture of their empty kitchen table with the caption, "This is what it looks like when your daughter walks out on you." The narrative they were spinning was cruel, manipulative, and deliberate. They wanted to guilt me back into submission, to make me the bad guy so that everyone would pressure me into coming home. But this time, I wasn't going to let them control the story. I gathered every piece of evidence I had: the bank transfers, the screenshots of their Instagram posts in Hawaii, the messages where they begged me for rent money, the proof of them renting out my bedroom to strangers. I put it all together in one long post, explaining exactly what had happened from the day I moved back home until the day I left. I was careful with my words, making sure everything was factual and supported by evidence. Then I hit post. I didn't expect what happened next. Within hours, the post started gaining traction. Friends shared it, then friends of friends. People commented by the hundreds, some saying they had been through the exact same thing, others expressing outrage on my behalf. By the next morning, my post had gone viral. People on Twitter and TikTok were talking about it, using hashtags like #JusticeForNatalie and #FamilyRevenge. Strangers were sending me messages thanking me for speaking up, telling me my story gave them the courage to stand up to toxic family members in their own lives. My parents' reaction was immediate. They deleted their posts, but it was too late. Screenshots of everything had already been saved and shared across multiple platforms. Their friends started turning on them, asking why they had lied, demanding answers. I heard from my brother later that day that our relatives were furious with them, accusing them of exploiting me and embarrassing the entire family. For the first time in years, I felt like the power had shifted. I wasn't just the daughter who kept quiet and paid her parents' bills. I was the one in control of the story now, and the world was on my side. That night, as I watched the view count climb higher and higher, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: relief. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about finally being heard, about finally telling the truth after years of being manipulated and silenced. But as satisfying as it felt to see the truth come out, I knew this was only the beginning. My parents weren't going to take this humiliation lying down. The first call came late at night, just as I was about to go to bed. My phone lit up with my mother's name, and for a moment I almost let it go to voicemail. But curiosity got the better of me. I answered and heard her voice, soft and shaky, asking if we could talk. She said she had seen everything online, that she and my father were ashamed and just wanted to make things right. I could hear the desperation in her voice, but I could also tell she was being careful, choosing every word as if she was afraid I might hang up on her. The next morning my father called, and his tone was even more desperate. He told me that the family was falling apart, that they were being shunned by friends and relatives, and that they were losing respect in the community. He begged me to take the posts down, to stop airing family business in public. For years I had been the one apologizing, the one trying to hold the family together, but this time I didn't feel guilty. Instead, I felt strangely calm. After 2 days of calls, texts, and voicemails, I agreed to meet them for coffee. We sat in a small cafe near my new apartment, and for the first time, they looked smaller to me, like two people who were scared instead of in control. My mother's eyes were red as if she had been crying for days. My father barely touched his drink. They tried to apologize, stumbling over their words as they explained how desperate they had been, how they had made mistakes. They said they wanted to start over, that they wanted me to come home for dinner so they could talk as a family. I listened carefully, but I didn't let my guard down. I told them that their actions had destroyed my trust, that it would take more than a coffee meeting to fix the damage they had caused. I told them I wasn't taking down the posts, not yet, because they weren't just about me, they were about every person who had been manipulated by the people they loved most. My parents didn't argue, but I could see the frustration in my father's jaw as he clenched it. As we left the cafe, my mother touched my hand and said she hoped we could find a way back to each other. I nodded but stayed quiet. Deep down, I knew I had to protect myself before anything else. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with all my documents spread out. The bank statements, the screenshots, the proof of their actions, everything was there. For months I had been their safety net, but now I realized I had the power to hold them accountable. After a long moment of thought, I opened my laptop and sent everything to a lawyer I had contacted earlier in the week. The reply came within an hour. He said we had a strong case and that my parents could face legal trouble for fraud and financial exploitation. I stared at the email, my heart racing. This wasn't just about family anymore. This was about justice. The day of the court hearing felt like stepping into another world. I sat in the small claims courtroom, my hands clasped so tightly together that my knuckles ached. The folder of evidence sat on the table in front of me, a physical reminder of everything I had endured. My lawyer gave me a small nod of encouragement, but my heart was still pounding. Across the room, my parents sat stiffly. My mother avoided my eyes completely while my father stared straight ahead, his jaw set in defiance. When the judge called my case, I stood and walked to the front, my legs shaking but my voice surprisingly steady as I explained what had happened. I told the court about the years of rent money, the constant financial pressure, the guilt trips, and finally the discovery that they had used my money for a luxury vacation while I struggled to pay my own bills. I laid out every piece of evidence, from the bank transfers to the screenshots of their Hawaiian getaway posts, and handed over copies of everything. The courtroom was quiet as the judge flipped through the pages, occasionally glancing up at my parents with an expression I couldn't quite read. My parents' turn came next, and I could hear the tension in my father's voice as he tried to justify their actions. He said they had been under stress, that they had needed a break, and that I had agreed to help them. But the judge did not seem impressed. The facts were too clear, the paper trail too strong. My mother's voice cracked when she tried to explain why they had asked for the extra $3,000 before the trip, claiming it was for overdue bills. The judge simply held up the screenshots showing them sipping cocktails by the ocean 2 days later. When the ruling finally came, I felt my entire body sag with relief. The judge ordered them to repay a portion of the money, a significant sum that I never expected to see again. It wasn't everything, but it was enough to feel like a victory. For the first time, I felt like the scales had tipped back in my favor. My parents sat in stunned silence, my mother looking down at her lap as if she couldn't bear to meet my eyes. My father's face was red, his pride wounded more than anything else. When I walked out of the courthouse into the bright Colorado sun, I felt a strange mix of emotions. I was happy, yes, but also heavy with the reality of what had just happened. I had taken my parents to court and I had won. People passing on the sidewalk might have thought I was just another person leaving a building, but inside me, everything had shifted. Over the next few weeks, the ripple effects began to show. Word spread quickly in our small community, and my parents' once spotless reputation started to crumble. Friends who used to drop by for coffee stopped visiting. Their neighbors kept conversations short. Some people even whispered when they walked by. I knew it must have been humiliating for them, but part of me believed it was the consequence they had brought on themselves. I tried to move forward with my life, focusing on work and spending more time with my brother, who supported me through it all. There were moments when I wondered if this had been too much, if maybe I had gone too far. But then I would remember the months I spent crying alone in my apartment, wondering how I was going to survive while they were smiling on a beach. One evening, as I was getting ready for bed, my phone buzzed with a new message. It was from my mom. My stomach twisted as I read it. "You ruined us. I hope you're happy." I sat on the edge of my bed staring at the screen, my heart pounding. I knew they were angry, but seeing the words in black and white hit me like a punch. I didn't know whether to cry, delete the message, or respond. For a long moment, I just sat there in silence, staring at the glow of my phone, knowing this wasn't over yet. After the court case and the painful message from my mother, I realized I couldn't keep carrying the anger around with me forever. It was eating me alive. I started going to therapy once a week, sitting in a quiet office with soft lighting and a therapist who actually listened to me, really listened, in a way my parents never had. At first, I just cried. I cried for all the years I had been taken advantage of, for all the birthdays and vacations I had missed, for the girl I had been when I moved back home after college, hopeful and eager to help. Little by little, I began to feel lighter, like I was finally putting some of that weight down. Therapy helped me see things differently. I began to realize that my parents' behavior had nothing to do with me not being good enough. It wasn't my fault they had mismanaged their money or put themselves in a position where they relied on me to fix everything. For years I had been living as though their problems were my responsibility, but for the first time, I understood that I could choose to step out of that cycle. I began taking better care of myself. I cooked real meals instead of eating whatever I could grab during night shifts. I took long walks after work and even joined a yoga class. I was building a life that belonged to me, not one that revolved around keeping someone else afloat. Weeks turned into months, and I slowly started to feel proud of the person I was becoming. My apartment felt less like a temporary space and more like a home. I saved money, bought new furniture, and even booked my first real vacation with friends, a trip I had denied myself for so long. It wasn't easy, and there were days when I still woke up with anger boiling in my chest, but healing was no longer just a dream. It was something I was actually living. Then, just as things were starting to feel stable, my brother called me one night. I could hear the strain in his voice before he even said the words. He told me our parents were facing foreclosure. Their bills had piled up, their credit cards were maxed, and they had burned through the money they had left. If they couldn't come up with a solution soon, they were going to lose the house. I sat in silence for a long time after he told me, my heart twisting in a way I didn't expect. A part of me felt justified, like this was the consequence of their actions finally catching up to them. But another part of me felt something softer, something I didn't want to admit. These were still my parents. For all the pain they had caused, they were still the people who had raised me, still the ones who had taught me to ride a bike and taken me to my first school play. That night I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. I had fought so hard to get out from under their control, to build a life that was mine, and now I was faced with a choice. I could stay out of it and let them face the consequences, or I could step in one last time, not out of guilt, but out of strength. By morning, I had made my decision. The morning after I made my decision, I called my bank and arranged to anonymously pay off a portion of my parents' debt. It wasn't everything, not even close, but it was enough to keep them from losing the house right away. I didn't do it for them, not really. I did it for myself. I needed to know that I had done the right thing, that I had acted from a place of strength rather than bitterness. As I hung up the phone, I felt a sense of calm wash over me, as if I had finally closed a chapter that had been open for far too long. I didn't tell my parents what I had done, and they never found out it was me. The foreclosure notice was delayed, and they were given more time to figure things out. My brother later told me they were stunned by the unexpected break and seemed almost humbled by it. I didn't ask for gratitude, and I didn't need it. What mattered most was that I had taken back control of my story. Over the next year, my life changed more than I could have imagined. I earned a promotion at the hospital, which meant better pay and a more manageable schedule. I finally upgraded to a bright, spacious apartment that felt like it had been waiting for me all along. I bought furniture I actually loved, hung pictures on the walls, and started inviting friends over for dinner. My life no longer felt like a series of sacrifices, it felt like something I was building with intention. I also learned the power of boundaries. I kept contact with my parents to a minimum, speaking mostly through my brother, but I no longer felt crushed by the need to please them. I could answer a call when I wanted to and let it ring when I didn't. I could visit on holidays and leave when things became uncomfortable. For the first time, I felt like I had choices, and that freedom was priceless. Sometimes I still saw my parents in town, and there was always a complicated pang in my chest when I did. I didn't hate them anymore, but I also didn't let myself forget what they had done. Forgiveness, I realized, didn't mean erasing the past. It meant learning from it and refusing to repeat the same cycle again. One quiet evening, as I sat on my couch with a cup of tea and looked around at the life I had built, I felt proud of myself. I had been betrayed, yes, but I had turned that betrayal into strength. I had been broken down, but I had rebuilt myself. The girl who once worked double shifts to keep her family's lights on was now a woman who had learned that she could light her own path, and she was walking it, one strong step at a time. Before I closed my laptop that night, I shared one final update with the thousands of people who had followed my story since the beginning. I thanked them for standing by me, for reminding me that I wasn't alone, and for giving me the courage to take back my power. Then I left them with one final question. Would you have forgiven them or cut them off forever? Comment below and subscribe so you don't miss more stories like this, because trust me, there are more stories to tell. As I sit here today, looking back on everything that happened, I realize this story was never just about money. It was about finding my voice after years of silence, about learning that it's okay to put yourself first even when it means disappointing the people you love. My parents' choices hurt me deeply, but they also forced me to grow into someone stronger, someone who knows what she deserves and isn't afraid to demand it. If you've ever been betrayed by the people you trusted most, I hope my story reminds you that you are not alone and that you have the right to protect your peace. Healing is hard, and it doesn't happen overnight, but it is possible. I went from crying over rent transfers to thriving in my own apartment, living on my own terms, and finally sleeping at night without that constant knot of stress in my chest. Now I want to hear from you. Would you have forgiven them like I did, or would you have cut them off forever? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story hits home for you, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The twists, the betrayals, the redemptions, we go through them together here. And trust me, the next story might just be the one that changes the way you look at family forever.